Hello, and in today's videos we're going to look at D.O.G.S, the RPG that's actually a re-implementation of D.O.G.S in the Vineyard by Vincent Baker, who you might know from Powered by the Apocalypse. Now, D.O.G.S in the Vineyard was a sort of strange Wild West Mormon sort of missionaries for God to make sure that the flock were obeying the tenants, and it had all sorts of weird and wonderful rules. And I never actually played D.O.G.S in the Vineyard in its actual setting. I started dabbling with the Banthas in the Vineyard sort of hack that people were talking about, and also Zombies in the Vineyard, which is the version I've run 2-3 times. So I was very keen to actually get hold of a physical copy of D.O.G.S in the Vineyard, but it doesn't seem to exist anymore. So instead, you buy this, the D.O.G.S system. So it's got this rather unfortunate acronym of Dice Pool and Moral Predicament Based Generic Role-Playing System, which doesn't really roll off the tongue. It's a fairly plain booklet. I think I got this copy off Lulu, but it is also available on DriveThruRPG, so I will put a link in the video for you. Now, basically, it's a generic rule set now, and the layout's decent. It's not brilliant, but you know, it's a self-made booklet with probably a lowish budget, and it's got nice, fairly clear font. Now, I don't think it's quite as easy to pass as the original D.O.G.S in the Vineyard for me. I found that a little bit of an easier book to read than this, and it comes with a whole load of settings as well. And basically, the way the game works is you have a dice pool. So you have a background, you then have what's known as a focus, which determines if you're trained, connected, spiritual. You assign various dice to your traits, your relationships, and your powers, and also equipment. You then have what's known as a training conflict, and that generates your sort of character. And you've got body, mind, soul and spirit as your sort of traits, which are like your strength, dexterity for body, your intellect for mind, your sort of charm, charisma is the soul, and then your willpower, magic-y type stuff, I guess, is the spirit. And you allocate all these dice, which can vary, you know, from various dice sizes. And when you get into a test, you basically roll your dice, and you sort of almost like gamble with them, a bit like poker, I guess would be the best way to say it. And if you're doing non-physical, non-violent actions, then you're going to use mind and soul. If you're doing physical non-violent, so non-physical is mind, physical is body and soul. Physical violent, i.e. melee, is body and spirit. Ranged violence is mind and spirit. And violence using powers is soul and spirit. So these are the stats that you can draw your dice from. So basically you decide what sort of test you're doing, you roll your dice from that particular ability, and what makes it interesting is this concept of fallout. So when you have a conflict, as I say, you go into this sort of, talks about it here, page, what is that, 19. So you roll your dice, you can raise your dice, you can call a player out, so very sort of pokery terms. You can escalate, so you know, if it's non-violent, non-physical, you can start like pushing people around, and then if that's not working, you can then like pull a knife on them, then you can pull a gun on them, and then you can like blast them with your mind powers or whatever. So you then win and lose, and you've got consequences and growth from what's known as fallout. So basically you effectively decide to end the conflict, and there's fallout based on sort of the larger the dice and the result. So it can be pretty savage. So 2 to 7, you can choose a short-term consequence. 20 plus, someone's dead. So it maps very well to a sort of escalating tension, and that's where the Banthas in the Vineyard was very good, because it followed the Yodas, you know, I sense much fear in you, fear leads to anger, anger to hate, and hate to suffering, and all that sort of stuff. And this consequence score sort of follows that sort of escalation really well. And in play, the rules, which I think are described in a little bit of a clunky way in both the original and this version, actually play pretty smoothly. But what's particularly interesting about this version is most of the rules are pretty much done by page 32, but you get a bit about how to run it and creating characters and all sorts of stuff. But then you get into the campaigns, and there's quite a few campaigns in here. And if we go to the table at the beginning here, yeah, so you've got some example campaigns on page 35, but you've got this big campaign here, the Freshman's Frenzy. So let's flip to the settings, so 35. And so mercenary company in a fantasy setting, so sort of classic. The world is ours with one notable difference. So basically people are superpowers. 1900s, born with the power to manipulate elements. Clerical order, so this is sort of your original Dogs in the Vineyard sort of setting. So this is setting number 4 on page 37. Your vampires. Diplomats in a fantasy world. Teenagers recruited by benevolent aliens, so sort of Power Rangery. High schoolers recruited by benevolent aliens against giant evil beings and stuff. So these are obviously that sort of Power Ranger, Guyvery sort of stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's a simple little rule book. As I say, most of the rules are done in 30-40 odd pages, but I found the layout of this not as easy to follow as Dogs in the Vineyard, and I noticed that is something that does seem to be happening recently. I'm struggling with some of the layouts of modern rules, so I don't know if that's down to me or it is actually a problem with the rule books, but yeah, that is a common complaint, that I sometimes find rules don't just flow off the page like they used to for me, so I don't know what that's about. But anyway, I do recommend this. It's fairly cheap to get hold of. You can get a PDF or, as I say, a physical copy. And Dogs in the Vineyard was a cool little game. Vincent Baker's not 100% happy with it, and I think he much prefers Powered by the Apocalypse, which is going gangbusters. But I did really like Dogs in the Vineyard, and I really like the setting, ironically, even though I could never persuade anyone to actually play it. So if you're hankering for a bit of Dogs in the Vineyard, then you know you can get hold of this Dogs, which, as I say, is a fan-made re-implementation of the Dogs in the Vineyard system with the blessing of Vincent Baker, it should be pointed out. And yeah, it's pretty good. As I say, the interesting thing, and that makes it sort of interesting to me, is the fact that you can start off with low level conflict, slowly escalate it, and you've got this sort of bidding mechanism where you commit your dice, and then obviously at the end, the more dice you've committed, the more chance you have of rolling a high number, which could result in someone being dead. And it is, I guess, a sort of a narrative style role-playing system, so if you're not into that, you might not enjoy this. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Short and sweet. Hope you're enjoying your life at the moment, and until the next video, happy gaming.